So I get the pleasure of introducing John today. So having just stepped down as, or should I say, have been freed of the obligations of being chair at the Anthropology Department at the University of California, San Diego, John Beard Haviland is a world-renowned linguistic anthropologist and is currently a distinguished professor at UCSD. I first came to John's work as a graduate student in Michael Silverstein's language and culture class, where John's work was one of the few pieces that we read that Silverstein did not insist on reading on top of, or you could say panning, right? Instead, Silverstein took up John's argument in its own right, as John had presented it, a fact which puts John in a class with the likes of intellectual greats such as Edward Sapir and W.V.O. Quine. He's blushing now. He's not very good at self-promotion, so that's my job. I'm certain I'm not overstating things if I call John a trailblazer in linguistic anthropology. Just at lunch today, our own Janice Knuckles commented on how, as the rest of us are catching up to what John has been doing, he always moves on to something new, which we soon follow. In addition to his early, more purely linguistic work on the Tzotzil language, John has done important work on language as it relates to such varied topics as identity, selfhood, linguistic relativity, interactional universals, and Aboriginal land rights. If our conversations that we had today are any guide, I suspect he'll be next studying the work of court interpreters, something he was doing just this morning for a case in Florida from his humble hotel room here in Provo via a rather poor phone connection. Personally, I've known John's intellectual productivity is matched, if not exceeded, by his kindness and generosity. He's always been quite generous with his time and willingness to help students, undergraduate and graduate and postgraduate alike. John's talk today will take us on an exploration into the emergence of sign language among a group of Z-signers among Zincantec speakers in Chiapas, Mexico. I should slow down so that can all get spelled out. So with this, I'm very pleased to introduce John Haviland.
Thanks very much for this very generous and completely undeserved introduction. I'm going to try to run this presentation with my left hand, which I'm very bad at. So let's see if we can make it work. But it's a great pleasure to be here. I've always wanted to come onto the BYU campus, and today's my day. So I am going to talk to you today about some very recent work. The material that I'm going to present here has all been collected in the last 4 or 5 years, maybe a little bit more than that, maybe 6 years, and it all is a direct result of actually my moving to San Diego about a decade ago. And you may ask how it is that I can possibly be talking about something like inventing a new language, and I hope that will be clear to you today. And I hope it will also be clear to you why, for me, someone who's been working in this community for almost half a century, the chance to work on something like a brand new emerging sign language has actually, I think, in some ways revolutionized my own thinking about the relationship between language, social life, mind, and the creation of social relationships. So I'm going to talk about what I've called Zincantec Family Homesign. I just call it Z for short because it's much less of a mouthful. And it's a sign language, or it's a sign system that has emerged over the last 30-some years in the community of Zincantan, which is in that part of the highlands of central Chiapas in the southeastern state of Chiapas in Mexico, right on the Guatemalan border. The language, the spoken language that surrounds this little island of deaf folks is Tzotzil, which is a Mayan language that I've worked on for a long, long time. And I started working on this language precisely because I found myself in circumstances at UC San Diego where many people knew quite a lot about sign language. I really knew nothing at all about sign languages, and where they were working on what have come to be called emerging sign languages. If you just stop and think a little bit, I don't know how much people know, and I realized at lunch today that the people's general familiarity with sign language may require that I give you a tiny introduction. But if you think about how sign language has come into existence, you realize that most human beings are born with what we call normal hearing, and a very small percentage of them in different parts of the world, but the percentage is roughly the same in just about every part of the world. A few more than 1 or 2 per 1,000 people are born with various kinds of hearing impairment. And what happens in a country like the United States, of course, is if you're born deaf, you're diagnosed as deaf just about from the moment you leave the hospital, and your parents are sort of warned of the fact that you're deaf, and you are very likely channeled by one means or another into some kind of a community where what you learn, maybe in addition to some spoken language if you have that capacity, is a sign language. But of course, throughout human evolution, this has not been the case, and it's not the case in most of the world. So in most of the world, if you're born deaf, you are a child of hearing people in a hearing community. There is not necessarily any sign language used around you, and you have to make do with what you can without having access to a spoken language. What you can usually comes out to what people have called, and is known in the scholarly community as home sign. Home sign being that kind of ad hoc gestural system that spontaneously emerges between a deaf child and usually his or her hearing caregivers. And it's pretty much a one-off thing. It develops in the moment, and it develops as best it can. It has been, as I say, in this country, it frequently happens that a child may have a period of home signing with hearing parents, but then may be moved into a community where he or she can learn sign language. But this is not the case around the world. And some people, of course, never acquire full-blown sign language and never are in a community of people who sign. And this, as I say, been the typical circumstance for deaf people really out throughout human history. So home signs have been studied extensively by various people. Probably the best known work is by Susan Golden Meadow at Chicago, who studied a series of home signers here in the United States quite a long time ago now. And one of the things she discovered, and it was very important work with respect to our understanding of language and cognition, language and mind, the relationship between language and social relations, is that there are language-like, what she calls robust, resilient, language-like features of home signs, even though they never really quite come up to the level of what we would normally consider to be a language. So, for example, they often show different kinds of expressions that are more or less analogous to parts of speech in spoken languages. They may have some early evidence of something like syntactic structure. So, for example, they may exist in exhibit consistent ordering of different constituents in sentences, as, for example, in English where we have subjects, verbs, and nouns, as you will know, subject, verbs, and objects. And they may even have phrase structural-like characteristics in which different signs can be grouped together in some way that's much like the way probably, I guess it wouldn't have happened to most of you, but in my case, in 4th grade, we used to have to diagram sentences, and we had to figure out what words went together. Well, it's sort of in that same way. So these sorts of language-like features are exhibited in home sign systems, even home sign systems that only grow up spontaneously and then disappear when the children, for example, start learning a sign language. Then there are other kinds of situations, and these are in some sense more surprising, and it's only very recently that academics have paid much attention to these other circumstances and of what we call emergent sign languages. So, for example, my colleagues at UCSD have worked for the last decade or so on an emerging sign language that's spoken in an Arabic-speaking Bedouin village in the Negev Desert in Israel. And this language descends ultimately from probably the home signing practices of a group of 4 siblings who about 80 years ago were born in this village. They happened to be from a very powerful family in the village. And as a result of patterns of preferential marriage and so on, they have had lots of offspring. And a very large percentage, much larger than normal percentage of their offspring have been deaf, and similarly with subsequent generations. So now in the 3rd or 4th generation of deaf people in this village, there's a much larger percentage of people in the village than we'd expect who are deaf. And as I was saying at lunch, because a village like this does not make a practice of throwing its deaf people away, that is relegating them to the corners of life, they are ordinary, fully functioning members of the village and of the society of the village. And as a result, virtually everybody in this village is a signer. Most of the people are also speakers of Arabic. But people learn the sign language as well as Arabic as part of the normal vehicle of ordinary social life. And this language, because it has been expanded, is the language used by quite a large number of people in the village, both hearing and non-hearing, has developed over several generations so that it exhibits more features of what we would think of as an ordinary human language. And these sorts of more or less spontaneously occurring natural signs are to be distinguished again from what we normally think of as sign language. That is what most Americans, for example, would imagine as sign language, which is a really highly established, highly codified national language that is learned in school. It's transmitted also naturally between generations, so deaf children born to deaf parents who also speak ASL, for example, American Sign Language, will learn it the way any child learns any language, that is just by growing up in the family. And this is also true, of course, of hearing children of deaf parents. They will also learn to sign spontaneously as part of growing up in their families. These languages have a different character because something has maintained them and something has caused them to exist for longer than sort of the ephemeral sorts of sign languages that might emerge spontaneously in a village. And it usually has to do with schools, institutions of higher learning, and so on, that both standardizes the language and also promulgates it, that is, distributes it more widely in the community. So something like my Z case is a very special case. It is more than a single home signer because there are several children, as you will see, who are deaf in this family. But it is also less than a village sign language because it is not widely distributed outside that tiny little environment of people who have learned to use it or who have developed it. So let me just show you a little bit about what this family looks like. So this is a kind of a simplified genealogy of really the entire community of Z signers. So you can see the parents here. Can you hear me if I'm talking without the microphone for a second? These are the parents. And you notice of their children, this is not the whole list of their children, but the last 4 of their children, of those last 4, 3 of them were born deaf. They're the ones in purple here. And the way you say this in Tzotzil is you just say they never learned to talk. They didn't talk. Because, of course, since they can't hear, they can't learn the spoken language, and therefore they never learned to talk. And it was a long time, really, before, I would think Jane was already in her teenage years before we figured out that the reason she didn't talk was that she couldn't hear. Frank, also born into this family some 6 years later, also never learned to talk. Terry, born a little bit later, also did not talk until she was about 3, and then suddenly she started spouting sort of fully blown Tzotzil. She'd been learning Tzotzil all along, it's just she didn't really feel, since she spent all her time with these deaf siblings, that there was any particular point in talking, so she signed instead. So she's the first and from my point of view, the most important of these signers because she's the one that I can actually talk with since I can speak with her in Tzotzil. Then a younger sibling was also born deaf. So the first thing to think about when you look at this little genealogy is that it's worth just doing a mental kind of experiment with yourselves and trying to imagine what their lives were like. So contrast the situation of Jane, the oldest, who for the first 6 years of her life was the only deaf person in the entire, certainly in the family, but in fact in the entire village. So none of these folks have ever met any other deaf people. None of them have ever had exposure to any other sign language. So anything that they do here, they have basically invented for themselves or conjointly invented in some small group. And that's part of the story I want to tell today about how this conjoint invention develops things in a special way. But for 6 years, she was really the only deaf person, and she was extraordinarily isolated. So whatever she had developed and so on, she had to do with tremendous effort, mostly in connection with her older siblings and her mother. Frank's situation was very different because when he was born into the family, that little home sign that Jane and her caregivers had been developing was already there. So he took it for granted. It was there from the very beginning. And so he had before him, from the very start, a kind of miniature language model that he could already take on from the time he was born. And by the time we get to Will, or even more when we get to little Victor down here, who is the son of Jane, as you can see, who's a hearing child, but born into a community where people were already signing, his relationship to this language and his relationship to language in general is very different because, of course, he comes into a sign system that is already well on its way to being developed, and he's able to take it from the very beginning and work with it in exactly the way a hearing child is able to take the little bits of language that he or she hears and work with them, start developing them, working out rules for it, and so on. And I should just say that Rita over here is the daughter of an older sibling. As you can see, she was also raised in this family because her mother was sort of abandoned right at the time she was born, so she also grew up in the same cohort, is also a hearing, fully fluent signer. Okay, that's just by way of introduction here. What I want to talk about today, I think I'll really only talk about three things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how you even start working on a situation like this. Nobody else speaks this sign language, right? No one else signs it. I'm about the only person who has good enough Tzotzil and who knows these folks well enough to be able to hang around with them in order to learn it. Because I should tell you that these children were raised up in such a way that they were so chagrined, if you like, by not being able to hear, that they would not sign around anyone outside of the family. They just simply wouldn't do it. Someone outside the family would come in, they would be silent and sort of disappear. So it took someone like me who has a long-standing relationship with his family. I've known them all since they were born, and I had a long relationship before that with the parents, to be able to somehow crack this self-imposed communicative barrier and be able to move inside and work on the language. It's partly for that reason that I felt totally obliged to do it. Some of you will know about the really fascinating work that was being done about the time that I became aware of these children, about the time they were born in Nicaragua with Nicaraguan Sign Language, where again, groups of home signers were brought together in a school in Managua, and over the passage of time and with subsequent generations, developed a kind of pidgin sign language based on those different home signs, and then creolized it by having it be the first native language of several generations of deaf children. That was already going on. I was aware of it. I thought, here we have a situation where we can actually, for the first time, see the first generation of such a language. But it took me a long time to gain enough sort of chutzpah to be able to work on this language, and also to have, because I don't know anything about sign, I thought I'd better wait until I knew something before I went ahead. Anyway, so I'm going to talk a little bit about methods, and I want to talk about two quite specific linguistic features of this language that I think are interesting, and they are very generally applicable. One of them has to do with what the signs are like, that is, where they come from and what they mean, what generates them, if you like, and how they become what we might call portable, meaning signs like, say, the words of English or Spanish or Chinese or whatever, which you can actually take from one place to another with one set of people that you don't know to another set of people you don't know and make them work. How do they get that kind of portability? And also I want to talk a little bit about how they become more and more language-like. So I'm going to talk about the emergence of a particular piece of the language. Anyway, and then I want to say something at the very end, if I have time, about language ideologies, the kinds of beliefs, theories that people have about language, and how this interrelates to how they relate to each other, which is a characteristic of all human languages, and I want to show that it's also present even in this tiny little miniature speech or signing community. So let me give you first an idea of what this looks like. As I say, I've known these kids all their lives, and in fact, some maybe 25 or so years ago, I was involved in another project that did some filming in the family where these kids were growing up. And so I just happened to have some videos from 1991 of these kids when they were much younger. So I'll show you first this little video that shows Jane, who's the woman with the green shawl, interacting with her littlest brother, who's just 3 years old at that point, and you'll see sort of how she deals with him. This is in slow motion. So as you can see, he's just walking by and she just sort of gratuitously whacks him on the head. Or here is Frank interacting with his father. And you can see already at this point, the kid is just 9 years old, right, that they have some gestural sign routines going, then they are perfectly able to communicate with each other. This is in slow motion. So he tells him, go get my hat. He goes and gets the hat. Okay, pretty straightforward. So again, just think about how one would do this kind of research. And one of the hallmarks of any kind of research on an undocumented, an exotic language, is that you make as few assumptions as you can before you start, just so you don't want to contaminate your mind with wrong assumptions about how the language works. So a kind of real methodological austerity. Because I'd done lots of work already when I started this work on the speakers, the gestures that speakers who speak Tzotzil use, and I took as a kind of axiomatic principle that if there's anything available in the habits of the non-deaf people in this community that they could use for their sign language, it might possibly be in the gestures of speaking people. I took that as a kind of a guideline, but I tried to spend as much time as I could looking really at the form of what people do, rather than trying to make some assumptions before I knew anything at all about what they were trying to say. Just what did they do? That's what I mean by form first. It means also that I was very hesitant, particularly at the beginning, of relying on Tzotzil explanations in speech about what people were saying. I knew that people knew what they were saying, they could understand each other, but I was very dubious about the rendering of those signed signals into spoken Tzotzil. So I started off with various kinds of, I guess you'd call them pseudo-experimental techniques. I can just give you an example. Here, for example, would be the kind of situation that I would set up these guys with. So I might show them a picture like this one. You see I have a whole bunch of tools on the table here, and I have a little red arrow there. I'd show this to the signers and say, okay, describe to your interlocutor what it is that I've picked out there with the red arrow. And then I'd show the interlocutor another picture of the same tools but arranged in a different way so that they couldn't use the arrangement there. And the person would have to say, what we'd say in English. That's a crescent wrench or whatever you'd call it. I don't know what you guys would call it. But you'd find that a trivial thing to do. The Z signers also found this a trivial task. It was very, very easy for them to do. So that by itself was strong evidence to me that they had something going for them in their sign system. A slightly more complicated case would be something like this. Same story. I've got an array of different things, but here you see that they differ in a slightly different way. Same thing. Describe that one and have the other people pick out the right stimulus. Again, trivial thing for them to do. But interestingly, non-trivial from my point of view. So just, you might think about, suppose you were trying to develop suppose you suddenly went deaf, or suppose you suddenly met up with someone with whom you shared no language. How would you do these tasks? Just think about it for a moment. Because these guys I think you'd have a little bit of trouble, and I have a feeling that these guys did much better than you would have done. But of course, this is a long way from what we normally aspire to as anthropologists when we work with languages. There, we're really interested in finding out how people converse with each other in ordinary circumstances. We're very interested in the details of their interaction with each other. We try to understand what they're managing to do, what they can accomplish when they talk with each other. Regular linguistic ethnography, for example. And that raises lots of questions which have occupied me really throughout my anthropological career, like what is the relationship between the language you speak and how you deal with the world, how you deal with other people, how you see the world, how you perceive things, and so on. These are the sort of backbone questions of linguistic anthropology that have always exercised me, and that's where you want to get, ultimately, when you work on or do a project like this one. So here, let me just show you a little clip, and this will give you a flavor of what this language is like, of the very first film I ever took of these guys when they were adults. So as I say, I've known them all their lives, but from 1991 until 2008, I never filmed them at all. So I just want you to look at this little interaction. You can see that they're in an animated conversation. And just so you will dispel from your minds the completely fallacious notion that there's something obvious about sign language, I want you to figure out what they're talking about. And this is an easy one. Don't know what happened. Anyway, so just from what you saw there, would you like to see it again? Okay, I know we've got some signers here because here they are up in front, and so maybe I should invite you first to, well, actually, you guys probably have a better clue. Anybody else want to make any suggestions at all about what these guys are talking about or what they're saying? Anything at all you've seen that somehow strikes you as familiar? Kurt, there seems to be some counting going on, right? What else?
It kind of looked like he was grasping something, pantomiming that, so like maybe a bowl or a cup.
Okay, so some kind of manipulation of some kind of an object seems to be involved in there. Those are all good observations. Did everybody see that? Yeah.
I think there are two different containers, one larger than the other.
Very good, very good. Okay, how about you ISL guys? What did you see? Any idea what the discussion is about? You're probably more likely to get better than I on that one. I don't want to put you on the spot.
Well, they're counting. Is it 1 to 10? It looked like he was touching all of his fingers. Maybe he was counting, and then he said 4. So I don't know what kind of container he was mentioning, but then later he said 2. So, you know, maybe he was talking about the size of 2 containers, one that was 4 and one that was 2 or something.
This is all very good, and it's very good, especially because you can see that the ASL speakers here can see a little bit more, maybe than the rest of you can see, because more attuned to paying attention to what these guys are doing with their hands, their face, their body, and so on. But let me give you the gloss here. And you'll see that you're half right, but you haven't gotten to the crucial part. So I'm going to show it to you glossed. So you missed the 10, right? The 10 as well as the 4. Right? But in any case, it's all there, right? And it's clear that they're having a little fight. And in fact, he's sort of criticizing her, right? She's asked here that they buy some refresco for me, because they know I've come there to talk to them and propose something to them. So the polite thing to do, good Zincantec thing to do, is to give me a gift. And so she proposes that they get the gift, and then they say to him, okay, you want to give him a gift? How much money do you need to go and buy that stuff? And she says, I don't know. So then they go on and criticize her for not knowing. All right, so you can see they're doing a lot of stuff. Now, at the same point, right around the same time, I also was able to observe this little kid who's the son of Jane, right? And this is when he was just a little bit less than a year old, around a year old. And you can see already in this little clip that he is already learning to sign. He's clearly learning to sign because he's emulating some signing. He actually emulates a negative sign. It's not clear that he has any idea what it means or when you do it or why you do it or anything like that, but he clearly has already seen that it's something you're supposed to do, and he's figured out there's something formally significant about it. Very much like babies at the same age, or maybe in this case a little advanced over babies at the same age, because in fact babies find it easier to manipulate their hands than they do their vocal apparatus. So in fact they're more likely to be formally competent signers at an early age than they are to be speakers. And they think he's really funny. They say, you know, this is great. Look at him. He's saying no. He's saying no. Right? Not at all clear that he knows that he's saying it, but he's already embarked on the task. And by the time he's 4, so by the time that a child, a hearing child, will already have mastered a great amount of the normal repertoire of spoken language, he also is extraordinarily competent. So just look at this one and see, again, if you can see what he's doing. He's doing one of my little experiments. See if you can see what he's trying to describe. Any guesses? It's hard for me to watch it because it's so incredibly clear to me, but it's not clear to you, I expect. Spicy food. Okay. Well, that's a pretty good observation. Okay, so I'm going to show you this. First of all, I'll show you the picture. So this is the picture that he's describing. And you may say, I don't get that at all. Because, of course, here's one of the problems. And as a linguistic anthropologist, this should not be surprising to me. I show them this picture because I see something in it. But this does not predict in advance what these Tzotzil guys are going to see in it. So I show it to them because I'm showing them this stone grinding stone, right? As you can see, there's a grinding stone there, and it's a metate, and there's the mano for the metate on the side. And then there's some other things that are sitting on it, and they're sitting on it precisely for the reason that the guys say nothing at all about the cho. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying the cho, that is the metate. They're not talking about that at all because they don't use them anymore. These guys are the wrong age. They're not familiar with people grinding corn on a stone metate. So this thing has just become like a little surface to store stuff on, other stuff. In this case, car keys, a bottle of Nescafe, and a bag of sugar. And that's, of course, what he's talking about. This is in slow motion. There's the key in the picture. There's the sugar, and there's the coffee. Right? Maybe coffee doesn't stink to you, but it does to me. Okay. So just keep this one in mind, because we're going to come back to it later. And just to show you that they get him, they actually show that they're a little bit confused, because these guys are old enough to have seen the stone grinding stone. And so they're a little confused by the picture, so they want to say, okay, why did he say that stuff? And you can see that Frank repeats back coffee to himself and saying, aha, that's what he meant by coffee, that Nescafe. So he says, why did he say coffee? Ah, yeah, there it is. He sees the coffee, right? All right. So this is just by way of saying that we want to get to a state where we can actually understand how this language is used sort of in real life, not just in doing these experiments that I started out with. So now I'm going to give you two other sort of quick lessons in Z. And one of them has to do with where the signs come from. And I don't want to go into great detail here, but those of you who've studied gesture at all will realize that, of course, we frequently, in speaking, use our hands to characterize or represent entities in the world. And sometimes those representations may be iconic in the sense that there's something similar about the way we use our hands and the thing that we're trying to represent. Something similar. And of course, as Peirce pointed out a long, long time ago, that notion of similarity doesn't get you very far because there are infinite numbers of ways that you could pick out the similarity between a particular object and the sign that you want to use, depending on what you're trying to say and what you're interested in. So there's potentially limitless resemblances that Peirce talks about. It means that the principle of iconicity here, the principle of similarity, though it's important for generating some signs, doesn't actually tell you anything about what the sign is actually going to be in any given case. So there has to be some way of trying to understand what principles of similarity will actually operate. And it is probably the case that many emergent sign languages are not sort of wide open with respect to the kinds of similarity that they choose for producing signs. They often have principled ways of selecting different kinds of similarity or different sorts of iconicity. And this is actually a very recent and a very strong result that comes out of the study of emerging sign languages. Probably it's also true for any kind of semiotic system that involves iconicity, but it's a very strong point to think that people systematically exploit it. So I'm going to show you some examples here, again, by way of test, just to bring you up to some understanding of at least one of those principles in Z, where you get the signs from. So let me show you a, did it move? No. Let me show you, well, maybe I could sort of skip this. Well, I'll show you this quickly. So this is just me a long time ago, many years and lots of hair earlier, talking with a compadre in Tzotzil, and he's just telling me about something that happened to him as a boy. And I just want you to look at what he does gesturally as he tells this story to give you some idea of these principles that are involved. Okay, well, you've seen lots of things there that are pretty obvious. So he does something that looks like an enactment, a human enactment of an action as he rings the bell to talk about the bell. He does something that seems to be, I guess we would technically call it a conventionalized emblem. That is a kind of a special gesture that has a very special meaning. It's very word-like. It's when he does this. Did you get what that was? When he talks about a little cup, is there something to drink, he says. And he's talking about a little cup full of liquor, a shot glass. And that's a conventional Zincantec sign. You just have to know what it means in order to read it. He does something that seems very indexical when he says that and they all sat down, and he sort of shows how they sat down by distributing that in space. And he also does something like he says, what do you want? Reproducing in narrative a kind of conventionalized way of doing a conversational term, like something like that, like a shrug or a nod, if you like. So all of those are very familiar. And so now, again, here I have Will showing us a picture. And again, I want you to look at it, keeping those kinds of principles in mind about how people make gestures in spoken Tzotzil, to see if you can figure out what the slide is. Okay, any clues at all? Anybody got any intuition about that? Anybody else? Anybody else? Okay, he's stolen my thunder, but again, I'm not surprised because ASL signers are attuned to this kind of thing. This is the slide. Right. So let me show it to you again, gloss, so you just get some idea. So see, there are actually 3 parts to that height thing, where he says first the height is like this, a middle-sized one and a big one. So he's actually got 3 parts to it. But you notice, so he does a kind of action thing that stands in for that noun, and then he tells you about the fact that there are 2 and so on. Okay, pretty straightforward. And I could show you many more examples of the same sort of thing, but I want to get, because we're short on time today, I want to get to my favorite example. So just imagine, you have to put yourself into the mind of a Zincantec Indian, and suppose this is the object that you want to describe. How would you do it? You want to give the word for chicken. Okay, don't be shy. So one person did this. Yeah. And you ASL guys will have lots of ASL ways to do it. Yeah, the coxcomb, and somebody did the kind of, walk like an Egyptian sort of head. Okay. Okay, I want to show you how you do it in Z. It's not mean. It's mean. Okay, so there is a semiotic chain here, as I say, from action to a selective iconic symbol. And I'll show you the action if you're not squeamish. So this is what Zincanteks do with chickens. This is from a curing ceremony. Okay, so the way you dispatch a chicken in Zincantán is by breaking its neck. And you do it with a quick pull that breaks the neck. You don't twist it or anything like that. All right, okay. So kind of consistent, characteristic human action with the object gives you the first sort of default route to producing a sign. And just so that you understand, just so that you believe that this really is the sign for chicken, I'll just show you how they do this picture, how Memo does this picture. Okay. So it's a tiny one of those. It's a chicken, right? 2 of them, 2 of them. Okay, so here you actually see a little bit more going on. You can see that there is more going here than I've talked about so far, and I don't want to dwell on this, but those of you who've studied syntax and people who speak ASL or who sign other developed sign languages will find this very familiar, because there is actually a kind of a little syntactic unit here in which you first have what would sometimes be called a classifier. Normally they're called now size shape specifiers, which show you something about the way you handle a thing, and that gives you an idea of what its size is, what its shape is. It will give you some idea of how heavy it is, what you do with it, and so on, followed by a characterizer, something that tells you what kind of a thing it is. So on the one hand, it's a tiny little thing that you could hold in your hand like this, and its tininess is emphasized by the face, and then it's this conventionalized sign, which means chicken or chicken-like thing. Actually, it also includes turkeys and some other domestic fowl. It really is the case that, oh yes, so I was going to show you this, and I'll show it to you just because it makes another point that's worth making, and then I'm going to try to move on to some other stuff. So I'll just show you this little performance and see if you can tell what this is. Probably not. Any ideas at all? Okay, the crucial thing here is you really have to pay attention to his hands. And of course, we didn't do that. But this is what he's describing. A tape measure. And the crucial thing is that if you pay close attention, you see that it really is the configuration of his hands and his movement that tells you that it's that kind of object as opposed to the other kind. Yeah, if you just look at the precise morphology of his hand here, you can begin to get some idea of how the morphological forms, the signed equivalent of something like phonemes or sounds, distinctive sounds, also begins to emerge, even in a language like this that's just in its first decades of existence. Okay, so my left hand is not working very well. And as I say, there's plenty of evidence that this is just the Z word for chicken. Here are these 2 guys doing another such picture, and they're doing it totally in unison, right? And adding a little bit of extra information about the picture that they're describing. I'm having trouble making this And it occurs in discourse. I won't bother to show you this well, but in normal conversation, I think he's good. Well, maybe I'll show it to you. So he's talking about how he got hurt on his arm, on his hand, and he says, you know, a chicken is the one who scratched me here on my arm. So he does that whole demonstration of the killing and so on as a way of saying chicken. Anyway, it's quite clear that this is the way that you do chicken in Z. The crucial thing to know, though, my finger's just not good enough, or maybe my finger's funny. The crucial thing is that even in such a tiny speech community as this, though, there is variation. You might be surprised by this, but it shouldn't really be terribly surprising, because in order for there not to be variation, there has to be something that eliminates variation. That if you've got different ways of doing chicken, then if you're going to settle on one, there has to be something that makes you settle on one. So Jane normally does not do chicken this way. Normally Jane does chicken this way. That's all she's done. So she's done nothing but the size shape classifier and nothing more. And in this case, there was no problem that the people immediately understood her. They knew she was talking about chicken. They got the right picture. But she doesn't do it only in these circumstances. She does it also in discursive character situations as well. So here Jane's talking about the fact that the herbs that had been planted at home have been all eaten up because the chicken has eaten them all. And she does again chicken just this way, no more elaboration than that. This is slow down. So she says those herbs that we had planted at home, the chicken ate them, right? She does eat it in a couple of different ways, and she tells you back where they are. So she's doing chicken again with this very minimal version of chicken. So this is important. Keep this in your mind, because we're going to come back to it in just a minute. So I'm going to go rather quickly through this next little part, but I want to show you something about a very different kind of linguistic process that's also evident in this community. And it has to do with, maybe I'll have to use another device for switching slides here. So I'm just going to show you what is probably the most common sign in Z. And this is the one that Will's going to do here. Okay, you can presumably figure out what he's doing there. What's he doing? Can you get any idea what's he doing? Stopping? Anything else?
Calling somebody to come to him.
Calling someone to come. Okay. Do you work in Latin America? I can't remember.
I work at Guatemala.
Yeah, I thought so. Okay, well, that makes good sense, because, of course, what he does there looks very familiar to anybody who has spent any time in Latin America. And you're going to see it in this little picture, with just regular Tzotzil speakers talking to each other in a ritual context. Did you see it? Watch this guy on the right. He's done this, and what's that mean? It means come here. It means come, right? It's a way of calling come. This is I use this example because it's actually unfamiliar to most North Americans, because, in fact, it doesn't look like come. That doesn't look like come. If anything, it sort of looks like go away or something like that. But this means come, right? This is true really throughout Latin America. It's not just Indians. It's a very common thing. I'll just show it to you again in slow motion so you can see it better, I hope. Did you see it, or did it not go? Right? So that's the way it looks. It means come. Okay, so it should not be a surprise to us. This is terribly conventionalized. So it should not be a surprise to us that these guys, the Z signers, use this sign to mean come in Z. Now here I'm actually going to show you that Terry and Victor use it with each other, but of course they're hearing people. So though they're both fluent signers, they're also fluent Tzotzil speakers. So it's a little hard to know when they do it, whether they're doing it in Z or they're doing it in Tzotzil, because they're talking Tzotzil here. So that means come here. I actually believe this is Z, not Tzotzil, but it doesn't really matter. Because it's also the case that Jane, for example, uses it with Victor here in slow motion to call him, say, come over here. This is how he does it. She does it. She's in the midst of something else, and she just says, come over here. And he comes over, in fact. It happens here where the very first day I saw it, actually, because here Frank is actually telling Jane, come out from behind that camera and sit down over there. Right? Come out from there and sit over there. He does it all in sort of one fluid motion. But the interesting thing is that it seems to be more than just that. So look at what Jane does here when she seems to be calling across the courtyard. she seems to do two quite different things there, even though they look very, very similar. In fact, they look uncannily similar. If you actually were to trace these on the video, you'd see that her arm and hand positions are almost exactly identical. One thing you see that's different is on the first little part there, she sort of does this several times, right? And the other time she goes like this. And she actually moves her hand down a bit more the second time. So just on this formal basis, remember I said before, form first. If you just look at the formal basis, you'd want to say, well, this is probably two different signs in Z. And if they're two different signs, one would suppose that they mean two different things. So what do you think? Well, I normally translate this thing as hey, meaning something like I'm asking for your attention, and this thing is come, directly, as it were, borrowed from spoken Tzotzil. The other thing is not borrowed from spoken Tzotzil because nothing like that exists in spoken Tzotzil. You never say hey like that in spoken Tzotzil. If you do that, somebody assumes that you're saying come. So something has, as it were, jumped the fence from spoken Tzotzil gesture to Z sign, and then it's changed even further by actually changing its formal properties somewhat, and also seemingly changing its functional application. So I could go in great detail, and I will show you a little bit about this, about how we can see that this really does mean hey. So in fact, what we see about this hey thing is it's normally used for interactional repair. What I mean by that is when you want to have the attention of your interlocutor and you don't have it for some reason or other, you do this to say, I want your attention. And here's an example of that. So here's a split screen. They're doing one of these experiments. The guys on the left, Terry and Will, have sort of looked away briefly, and she starts to talk and she realizes they're not looking at her, and so she waits for them, and then she does the hey sign when she thinks she maybe have the corner of their eye back to get their attention back, to bring them back into the conversation. So it's a kind of a turn-taking device. Yeah, I missed out the first part of this video, but she has started to sign, then she sees they're looking away, she sort of puts her finger in her mouth, sort of piglet-like, to pretend that she's not signing yet. And then when she starts to get their attention back, she calls for it explicitly with a hey sign, and then goes ahead and starts to sign. It might be a little bit clearer here in the case where you can see that Frank is clearly starting to do that hey sign, then he sees he doesn't have anybody's attention, and he just aborts it halfway through. Again, as I say, so it should be no surprise also that there are other ways to do this. There are ways that are not purely visual because, of course, these guys have lots of other modalities, so they can do it the way Terry tries to do it, where she actually grabs her brother on the leg or hits him on the leg, I think. No, that's not it. Well, you can't really see it, but let's go ahead. And you might also combine sound with it. So this may sound contradictory, but of course these are hearing people who are used to the fact that most of the people around them do hear. And therefore they know they can produce sound, which they can use also as part of signaling, even though they don't use speech sound. Right. So she does the hey and then pounds on the desk to get people's attention. These are actually techniques that are also used in ASL, I believe, for getting people's attention. So from a sign language point of view, this looks very familiar. It just does not look familiar at all from the Tzotzil point of view. So it seems to be an invention of theirs that seems to be, in some sense at least, parasitic on this modality jump between spoken gesture and sign. But I want to go even farther than that, and let's skip this one, because it's very interesting to me as a student of interaction to see exactly how these different modalities work. So when people's gaze is actually involved, where it is in relationship to when the gesture is performed, and so on. But let me show you this really crucial example, where I want to say that actually it seems that this hey sign has gone beyond the functional value of trying to get the attention of an interlocutor, where it's sort of been borrowed from come, has been turned into hey, but it seems to go somewhere beyond that as well. Because, interestingly enough, these signers frequently use this sign when they already have their interlocutor's attention. So it's no longer having the function, as it were, of attracting attention. It's doing something else that seems to be more discursive in nature. So look very carefully. You really have to look at the timing here. Notice these guys are looking away. So it's very complicated. And I'll play it for you one more time. But look carefully at what's happening to mutual attention here. So she starts off actually looking at the computer screen where the stimulus is that she's supposed to describe. The other guys are looking away. She knows they're looking away. But they come back to her before she starts to sign. she's not even looking at them when she does the hey sign. And they're already looking at her. And in fact, Will has already acknowledged that he's ready for her to start talking because he's given her a little eyebrow flash before she even does the hey sign. This is all hard to see in full speed. Okay, so this is the evidence of what I would like to call, by parallel with a similar phenomenon in spoken language, a kind of grammaticalization, where what starts off as a functionally derived attention-getting sign has been specialized and in some sense reduced to being something more like a turn start marker, a marker to say, I'm about to start talking now. I'm indicating now that I'm going to start to talk. So it has been bleached out of much of its functional value. It's also gotten somewhat simplified. It's also gotten more restricted in where it occurs in the linguistic structure. And that is exactly the characteristic sort of trademark of what we call grammatical or grammaticalized formatives in spoken language. So this is more evidence, in other words, that the language is following a path, or that this sign system is following a path that brings it to be much more like a language that we're familiar with in ways that are just quite modality specific. They are surprising versions in a signed modality of something that we should be very familiar with in ordinary spoken language. So I'll just skip over this. I just take for granted that you believe some of what I've just been saying. And I'll also skip over this whole section in which I was going to show you Victor acquiring this sign. It's actually very interesting to see how he does it, and the different stages in which he gets different pieces of this whole puzzle and gets them into place. But it's quite clear, and I'll bring you forward to where we can see it's a little hard for me to do this. It's probably a better way to do it. It's not going to work. I'll just jump forward. It'll just be much quicker. The interesting thing about that last case was that here, where he needs her attention, he tries to get it in the normal way, and he doesn't get it, so he actually grabs her ear and turns her head around so that he's looking at her, and he's looking at him in order to be able to talk to her. But if you remember that piece I showed you before about Victor and the coffee on the grinding stone, you can see that, in fact, if you look at both pieces here, you can see that, again, there is a very careful little dance, an orchestration of mutual attention here, in which he starts it off by doing this hey sign. He already has their attention. And they actually move their attention away from him before he finishes what he's saying, because they think they have enough information now to try to find the picture. So they're already looking at him. You see when he does his hey sign. He does key and there, and he does sugar and coffee, and now they look. And he doesn't see that he says the coffee's in a bag, which is what he says at the end. So he gets those three elements, that's all he needs. So from the point of view of how this interaction is structured in this very conversation-like sort of interaction, we should find it very familiar if we've been paying attention to what people have been telling us for many decades now about the structure of spoken conversation. Okay, I want to just jump to one final point, and I apologize for keeping you a little longer than you probably meant to. So first of all, I'll just summarize what I just said. There's a way in which there's been something that starts off as something as a gestural routine in the spoken language. It jumps over this kind of semiotic divide into the sign language as full cloth, as a sign for come. Then that becomes bleached out possibly into this generalized attention-getting signal, and then it becomes more specialized in a very familiar kind of grammatical way as this turn marker. So this is the sort of thing that we like to see when we want to argue this really is a language in the making. It's beginning to get linguistic characteristics of a very sophisticated sort here. And let me just jump over that one as well. The final point I want to make, though, is that there are some slightly more sinister parts to this business of becoming a language that, again, should be familiar from comments I made at the very beginning. So one of the things that goes along with language, we know this as anthropological linguists or as anthropologists, is that languages are never socially or even ideologically neutral. They're always linked up with practices of the people who use those languages for particular kinds of purposes. And that also means that there is a kind of generation of theories, of beliefs, and so on, the sorts of things we normally call language ideologies, that's characteristic of virtually of all languages. Because we use them to do things, the things we use them to do have a kind of, they leak back into our understandings of what languages are like. And this is what the theory of language ideologies tells us about. So one of the questions I asked at the very beginning was, what would make us create a portable sign? Why do we need them? What do we need them for? And once we have a conventionalized decision, if you like, the notion of convention sometimes harks back to sort of Durkheimian notions of a social contract, of agreement between different groups, and so on. But this is very mysterious, right? It's very mysterious with respect to language. I mean, who agrees with his 4-year-old kid that, this word means this? Well, nobody agrees. You just bloody tell them. That's what the word means, and say it right, and so on. Which is to say, there is power involved from the very start. And it's there in a very microscopic level, but it's centrally important to how language is reproduced, how it works, how it changes, and so on. And this is especially true in situations of multilingualism. So I want to go back to the question of who's the boss. So no big surprise. Victor is Jane's son, and he grew up and he learned the language from his mom. He also learned it from his uncles, but mostly his early interactions with his mom. So it's no real surprise that when he does chicken, he's just as likely to do it her way as their way. So here he is doing, describing a chicken picture. Okay, so again, he started off, as you saw, he started off just doing chicken this way. You can't see it very well, but he's just doing it this way. And they get it, but they don't like it, right? Now, they're pretty good-natured here. You can see Frank here is doing this in a pretty, laughing sort of way. He's saying, well, the kid didn't get it right. You should do this. We know how you're supposed to do chicken, right? So they sort of forgive him, right? This is not the case for Jane. And oh, by the way, here, just to show you again that there's lots of evidence about different kinds of ideologically standards of correctness, of appropriateness, and so on. After they've just gone through this little exercise, Frank has just corrected his nephew, but then he sort of seems to sort of repeat the word to himself, almost as though he's sort of saying, this is how you say that. It's like doing a citation form. It's almost as though he's signing to himself, right? He's saying, chicken, you do chicken this way, chicken this way. So it's just to show there's good evidence here of a kind of ideology of correctness that comes in exactly a standard Lebovian way. Some of you will remember the famous Lebov, fourth floor experiment, right? Where he goes into the store and says, where do you find socks in this store? And they say, fourth floor. And he says, what? And they say, fourth floor, right? Putting the R in the second time, which they didn't the first time, which is for Lebov evidence that the fourth floor form is the correct form, even though it's not the normal form, right? In order to be understood better, you say it better. So same kind of evidence here in this kind of example. But when Jane, does chicken her way, she gets a different kind of reaction. So here she's describing that little picture, and you see there's several things up there. There's some corn in that picture. So the chicken's been eating corn. That's part of what she wants to describe. This is the interaction. So Frank immediately picks out which picture she's talking about, and he looks then across at his colleague, in this case Terry, and says, what she meant was chicken. She meant chicken, right? But he got it. He didn't have any trouble understanding her. Sorry, I'll go back a little bit. But it can be much more demonstrative than that. So looking at a slightly different picture, the brothers have a very hard time figuring out what she means. And then they really criticize her for not getting it right. It's a chicken walking on the ground, she says. It's eating corn. There's another set of corn pieces over there. And they look and they don't find it. What do you mean? So he not only complains to the other person, he actually says to her straight out, say it right. Get it right. And I should just say that by way of the sort of argument that I'm sure a lot of you people are familiar with about what Segal and Judy Irvine call iconization, which is a process by which something that works in a way in one domain gets thought of as being like something in another domain, in which a similarity is found by virtue of some kind of common thread. So that the idea here is that it's possible to imagine that since you don't speak very well, as in this case of Jane, she doesn't speak very well, she doesn't sign properly, there are other ways in which she is not a proper person either. And this is the last example I'm going to show you, and it's just from that very first interaction. I was completely blind to it when I originally filmed it. It took me many years to be able to go back to that original video and understand actually what was going on, and I'll just show it to you. So, well, you can see because I think it's subtitled. So what he said here is, so we saw earlier that that Frank was mocking Jane for not even knowing how much a bottle of pop costs, either the big one or the little one. So she just doesn't even know that. She doesn't know how to count, doesn't know what the numbers are like. In this case, he's saying, her kid was crying, and I heard him, and I went to try to wake her up, and she wouldn't even wake up to take care of her kid. So not only is she a bad speaker, she's a bad mom. And the idea here is that just in the same way that this projection of language ability and personality onto sort of responsibility in a much more global sense is just as available for this tiny little speech community that's just emerging as it is for all the rest of us with all of our sophisticated linguistic abilities. And here he criticizes her as a deficient mother, I believe, by what he sees as her deficient language, an example of language ideologies rearing their ugly heads in a circumstance where you'd think it'd be sort of the least likely to occur. Okay, so sorry to have kept you too long here. I just will make a plug here for my sponsors in this work, if I can make it come up. So I've had very generous support from NSF and also from the Center for Research on Language for doing this research. This is a picture of these signers doing one of their favorite activities, which is conjointly assembling crossword puzzles, which is precisely what I've been trying to argue they're doing with their language as well. And I put this in bold because for those of you who would like to read more about this, the few publications that I've made so far about this language are all available on my website. So thanks very much, and thanks also to my collaborators here, especially the signers. Thanks.